The Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations and Related Programs will come to order. And then I hit my gavel now. I would like to welcome the Administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Dr. Raj Shah, to discuss the fiscal year 2012 budget request. Today we have a delegation of members from Parliament from Indonesia, Iraq, Lebanon, and Pakistan visiting Washington. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing our hearing to be. Many of them are seated in the audience, and I also want to welcome all of them for choosing to come here. Dr. Shaw, thank you for appearing today. The fiscal year 2012 request for the State Foreign Operations Bill is $59.5 billion, which is $10.7 billion, or 22% above the 2010 level. USAID administers a large portion of the funding in the bill, key programs like global health, economic growth, democracy and governance, and disaster assistance. Last week, I led a delegation of members from this subcommittee and the Defense Subcommittee to Colombia, Panama, Guatemala, and Mexico. We saw firsthand the positive impact programs like these can make to transform countries. Your staff in the field are truly dedicated, and I thank them for their service. While I understand the value of many of these important programs, the funding requested for next year is truly unrealistic in today's budget environment. Although the administration characterizes this request as a lean budget, the truth remains that an increase of almost $10 billion is a significant amount for American taxpayers. As we all know too well, the federal government's debt has grown enormously. With debt at historic levels, the Congress must demonstrate an immediate commitment to restrain federal spending. As this subcommittee works together to make difficult funding decisions, I'll ask members to look first at programs that support our highest priority national security needs. We must make a conscious effort to identify what is most important and meet those requirements within our subcommittee allocation. We simply cannot fund everything that has been funded in the past, and we certainly cannot continue to fund programs that are duplicative and wasteful. A large portion of the USAID request directly supports our national security, including programs for the frontline states in the Middle East. I will have a number of questions about these activities today. There are other requests that will require more discussion. Specifically, I hope you'll address the large request for global health, food security, and climate change. We need to better understand what has been achieved, what is planned, and what efficiencies can be identified so that the subcommittee can prioritize these requests accordingly. The subcommittee also needs to hear more about USAID's staffing surge, the Development Leadership Initiative. I understand the goal is to increase the agency's in-house staff so that they can better manage contracts and monitor and evaluate projects. However, doubling the number of Foreign Service officers, an increase of 1,200 employees above fiscal year 2008, is extremely ambitious. With this country facing such a dire fiscal situation, we need to know if this global staffing surge should remain a priority. We'd also like to hear more about your efforts to reform the agency through the initiative you began last year called USAID Forward. While the goals you have laid out are important, this proposal is expensive. We need to understand why it takes more money just to conduct business a little differently. Dr. Shaw, I hope you will address all of these themes in your testimony and during questions, and I look forward to hearing from you today. Let me close by reiterating that I want the subcommittee to work closely with you to craft a bill that funds the highest priority programs that support our national security. But at the same time, we must focus on slowing the rapid growth of some programs, eliminating duplicative programs and personnel, and increasing oversight and transparency. I know that working together we can achieve these goals. I'll now turn to the ranking member, Mrs. Lowy.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to join with our distinguished chairwoman and recognize the delegation. Thank you for joining us here today, and I hope you have an interesting and productive visit. And Dr. Shaw, I join Chairwoman Granger in welcoming you here today. USAID makes a profound statement about what our country stands for. We help treat the deadliest diseases that kill millions each year. We educate and empower youth with skills to be productive adults. We address climate challenges that threaten food supplies and the health of our air and water. We respond in times of crisis and disaster, and we build strong governments and civil societies to sustain these efforts. Throughout the world, millions have the chance to live healthy, productive lives because of USAID's efforts. And because development increases global stability, it is as important to our nation's national security as diplomacy and defense. I am very concerned that budget cuts will imperil the agency's efforts to regain the expertise to be the premier development agency in the world. Excuse me. While we are here to discuss the President's request for FY 2012, your perspective on the effects of the proposed cuts for FY 2011 in H.R. 1 on USAID's programs and America's global leadership would be helpful. One area of particular concern is the substantial cut to international family planning that was accompanied by the divisive reinstatement of the global gag rule. I hope you will quantify how cuts and changes will compromise the success of our previous development investments. In your overview of the administration's $14.2 billion request for these critical programs under your direction, I look forward to hearing about the administration's development priorities, including USAID Forward, as well as activities to ensure every development dollar is spent wisely and effectively. The committee would also benefit from your insights on USAID staffing levels and the agency's capacity to plan, implement, and oversee programs. While I support the priorities outlined in the President's request, I was discouraged that basic education funding was cut by $185 million. While nothing is a panacea in the development world, education, in my judgment, is the closest thing we have. It is an essential foundation for health, economic development, gender equality, long-term security. Investments in education pay for themselves many times over in economic growth and increased capacity. And the 9/11 Commission found that education was a critical weapon in the fight against terrorism. In light of the overwhelming evidence supporting basic education, I would appreciate an explanation of the proposed cuts. The argument has been made recently that while foreign aid programs may be effective, they're just not worth it given our current economic woes. I couldn't disagree more, and I think it's essential that we explain to the public clearly that foreign aid accounts for less than 1% of our nation's budget. We cannot balance our budget, pay down the deficit, solve our economic woes by attacking this 1%. And I certainly join my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who understand and believe that we have to deal with the deficit. It is essential to our future, but 1% shouldn't take a disproportionate cut. In fact, drastic cuts to USAID would risk a great deal in stability and security around the world, which could spawn the kinds of threats that cost this country the lives of men and women in uniform and billions in treasure. In the 1980s, when President Reagan undertook to rebuild the U.S. military, he said, and I quote, "We had to make up for lost years of investment by moving forward with a long-term plan to prepare for the future. We now have the greatest military force in the world, and many in its leadership lament the lack of enough development professionals on the ground in key strategic regions. In fact, President George W. Bush described American power as a three-legged stool: defense, diplomacy, and development. We must ensure that all three legs remain strong. We have made investments that are paying off now. We cannot afford to backtrack on our progress. Maintaining America's moral leadership throughout the world keeping our own country safe and secure, and saving taxpayers' money by preventing future crises is essential. I look forward to your testimony and to working with you toward these goals. Thank you.
Administrator Shaw, please feel free to summarize your remarks. Without objection, your full statement will be submitted for the record.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member Lowy, and members of the committee. I'm honored to join you here today in support of the President's fiscal year 2012 budget request. I also want to thank the international delegation for joining us today. It's a special honor to be with you. I want to briefly comment on USAID's response to the devastating earthquake and subsequent tsunami in Japan and the remarkable events taking place in the Middle East. In Japan, USAID is supporting a whole-of-government response, coordinating an interagency effort with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Departments of State, Energy and Defense, and Health and Human Services. We've deployed our largest interagency disaster assistance response team to support the Japanese emergency response efforts and provide technical expertise on nuclear regulatory systems, and provided 10,000 personal protective equipment sets, including suits, masks, gloves, at the request of the Japanese government to help those working near the contaminated zone in Fukushima. USAID has also led a significant humanitarian response in response to recent events in the Middle East. As we speak this moment, our disaster assistance teams are working on the Tunisian border with Libya and in Egypt, helping to deliver and coordinate assistance to those affected by conflict. In eastern Libya, we've delivered health kits capable of providing basic care to more than 40,000 people and worked with key partners such as the World Food Program to support pre-positioning and distribution of food and water. In places like Libya, Cote d'Ivoire, Darfur, and Haiti, we are focusing on concurrent humanitarian responses to provide critical assistance and care to those in crisis and those in need. Both the President and Secretary Clinton have emphasized that development is as important to our nation's foreign policy as diplomacy and defense. As a result, they've actively championed the goal of establishing USAID as an accountable and premier development enterprise. Representing less than 1% of the federal budget, the President's fiscal year 2012 request balances difficult trade-offs with a clear-eyed assessment of where we can achieve the best results, the most dramatic and meaningful results around the world. Forming the largest part of the President's budget request for foreign operations, the $8.7 billion USAID and state are requesting for the Global Health and Child Survival Account will allow us to achieve concrete outcomes. We'll continue to transform HIV/AIDS from a death sentence to a manageable disease for more than 4 million HIV-positive patients that currently get antiretroviral drugs. We will reduce the burden of malaria by more than half for 450 million people, helping countries and economies stabilize and grow. And we will prevent more than 4 million child deaths by providing cost-efficient vaccines to the farthest corners of the globe. We are also focused on helping countries develop their own agricultural sectors so they can feed themselves, an approach that is much more cost-effective over the long run than either food assistance or addressing food riots, famines, and failed states after the fact. For the $1.1 billion we are requesting for the Feed the Future bilateral agricultural development programs, we will be able to help nearly 18 million people in 20 countries, each of which have made their own significant commitments to this project. And most of the people we will help are women. We will help them grow enough food to feed their families and break the grips of hunger and poverty. In both health and food, these new strategies are emblematic of a new results-oriented approach we are trying to take throughout our development, democracy, governance, education, and water portfolios in order to get more leverage and better results for American taxpayers. But our foreign assistance will not just help people abroad. It will provide real, tangible benefits for those of us here at home. USAID's logo is a handshake, accompanied by the motto, "From the American people." But now more than ever, we are also delivering real benefits for the American people. In the most volatile regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan, USAID works side by side with the United States military, playing a critical role in stabilizing districts, building responsive local governance, improving the lives of citizens, and ultimately paving the way for our troops to return home safely. As General Petraeus recently warned, inadequate resourcing of our civilian partners, in fact, could jeopardize the accomplishment of the overall mission. USAID's work also strengthens America's economic security. By establishing links to consumers at the bottom of the pyramid, we effectively position American countries to enter more markets and sell more goods in the economies of the future, promoting exports and creating American jobs. Because development is critical to our national security and our future prosperity, USAID has worked tirelessly to change how we work across all of our areas of activity. Consistent with the President's Policy Directive on Development and the Quadrennial Diplomacy and Development Review, we've launched a set of reforms we call USAID Forward. To ensure our assistance is effective, we are requesting $19.7 million in 2012 to implement a new evaluation policy that is already setting the standard for the global community. This policy will provide performance evaluations for every major project, release them publicly within 3 months of their completion, and ensure that learnings are incorporated into subsequent programs as they're designed. To vigorously prevent and respond to fraud, waste, and abuse, I've created a new Suspensions and Debarment Task Force led by our Deputy Administrator, Don Steinberg. This task force is already coordinating efforts to more closely and more aggressively monitor, investigate, and respond to suspicious activity. Across our portfolio, we're seeking new ways to harness the powers of science, technology, and innovation to dramatically reduce the costs of achieving the results we seek to achieve. For our request of $22.1 million, we will recapture USAID's legacy as the leader in applying scientific and technical solutions to the challenge of development, reducing the cost of conducting our activities in health, agriculture, and so many other parts of our portfolio. Fundamentally, all of the reforms I've outlined are designed to achieve the same result: to create the conditions where our assistance is no longer necessary. The President's budget request puts this approach into practice. It cuts development assistance in at least 20 countries by more than half, including 11 countries where all bilateral development assistance has been eliminated. It terminates USAID missions in 3 countries, and it allocates almost $400 million in assistance. It reallocates $400 million and shifts significant foreign service positions toward priority countries and priority initiatives, making tough, sometimes gut-wrenching trade-offs in the process. We understand that USAID must continue to do its work in a way that allows our efforts to be replaced over time by efficient local governments, thriving civil societies, and vibrant private sectors. That's why we've launched the most aggressive procurement reforms and contracting reforms our agency has ever seen. Instead of continuing to sign large contracts with large contractors, we are accelerating our funding to local partners, local entrepreneurs, and tightening our oversight of projects and programs. To implement the QDDR and these reforms, and to deliver better results more efficiently for the American people, it is crucial that USAID's 2012 operational budget request of $1.5 billion is fully funded, and I look forward to discussing the details of certain programs like the Development Leadership Initiative and our procurement reform staffing requirements. At the end of the day, our assistance is not just a line in a budget. It is a reflection of who we are as a country and a core part of our national security strategy. Putting these values into action will deliver real results for the American people, making us safer, more secure, and more prosperous. I look forward to this discussion, and I appreciate your continued guidance, counsel, and support. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shaw. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you for quoting General Petraeus, and he was very strong in his statements when he was here before our time off, saying how important the work that we do in state foreign aid operations is to the work he's doing in defense. I think everyone on this subcommittee understands that. I will, you have your exhibit there that's less than 1% of the budget. I remind you it is 5% of the discretionary spending, so that's the figure that we're working on. I want to ask you, start in with the questions and you talked about how you're approaching this. I'm going to bring up something we've talked about before, and that's direct assistance. We've talked about this at previous hearings. I continue to be concerned about it. As part of your procurement reform initiative, your goal is to reach a level of 20% direct assistance in many countries by 2015. And for Afghanistan and Pakistan, a 50% goal remains in place. I continue to be concerned about this because of the lack of institutional infrastructure in some of the countries and the continuing reports of corruption in countries. My question is how they'll handle this direct assistance. It raises a number of questions, particularly at a time when foreign assistance is under such intense scrutiny. So tell me what specific measures USAID will take before providing direct assistance and throughout the life of that program.
Thank you. I appreciate that opportunity to do so. Our procurement reform overall is designed to allow us to work with a broader range of partners and to more efficiently deliver development assistance resources to projects and programs without losing as much to middle institutions along the way. The purpose of our procurement reform, especially as it relates to direct assistance and to investments in local institutions, whether they are parts of governments or not, is to help build local capacity so that we have an exit strategy over time and we can step away from our assistance, as we have in a number of Latin American countries with key long-term support for institutions that have become vibrant and self-sustaining, and including many of the countries that the recent delegation visited. I do believe the goal in Afghanistan and Pakistan of reaching 50% direct assistance is appropriate and can be implemented in a manner that ensures accountability. In Afghanistan, much of that assistance is provided through the Afghan Reconstruction Trust Fund. It's a program that is designed with the World Bank and many other partners. One of the major targets of resource use coming out of that are both infrastructure targets, but also the National Solidarity Program, which recently received a very strong validation from an independently conducted review by a United States university team that showed that it generates real outcomes on the ground efficiently. In the process of doing that, we are able to track and hold our partners in the Afghan government accountable for that. We're able to monitor the flow of resources from that trust fund through to those programs and the beneficiaries using the same process we would use with any other independent contract partner. And we do not alleviate or lessen our controls and our accountability. In fact, we provide a greater degree of accountability. In Afghanistan, that particular project is subject to our new Accountable Assistance for Afghanistan, or A-cubed effort that intensifies program design, has more site visits and project officers visiting programs, requires reporting back to Washington on what percentage of dollars are reaching beneficiaries and how a dollar actually gets consumed in the process of providing assistance, and monitors more regularly independent audits of those projects and of those programs. Similarly, in Pakistan, we've been able to achieve already about 47% direct assistance. But again, we're not doing that by writing checks in a blank way to the Pakistani government, by no means. We establish project control units. We still provide assistance specific to specific projects and programs that allow us to track how a dollar we're spending in that mechanism is used to buy vaccines or train midwives, and then report on the flow of funds in that context. So in both of those examples and in so many other parts of the world where we're taking this approach, we're intensifying our oversight, and the goal is not to reduce the quality of our accountability, but rather to build the capacity in institutions so we have an exit strategy for our assistance over time.
And I certainly understand it in countries, some of which we did visit, and that works, but they have a more mature infrastructure. When you talked about audits, my understanding is that you plan to contract out some of the assessments using local audit firms, but your own Inspector General has raised concerns about the credibility of local audit firms in Pakistan. How will you make sure that those reviews are legitimate?
So all of our auditing are done through validated audit firms. We have looked very carefully, especially in Pakistan, at U.S. firms that have local affiliates, and it will not be enough for us to just have a PricewaterhouseCoopers or Deloitte or some U.S. name on a firm. We will assess each team individually to make sure that they're capable of conducting the audits. I'd also say with respect to Afghanistan and Pakistan in particular, we are intensifying as part of our A-cubed effort mandatory data reporting so that we have access to a broader range of data, and we are not subject, as we have been in the past in conflict and war zones, to confidentiality agreements that limit the data that come into our auditors. And we're correcting and improving our accountability on that specifically.
Would you please give us the accountability measures in Afghanistan, just for the record? You called it A cubed, and if you give that to us for the record.
Yes.
Mrs. Lowy.
Thank you and welcome again, Dr. Shah, and thank you for your service. As you well know, over the past decade, I've worked with USAID to put in place an innovative and groundbreaking basic education program, and I am disappointed that for the second straight year, the Obama administration has reduced the level for basic education. With 67 million children in the developing world not in school, I cannot fathom why basic education is not one of the key development priorities in the budget. So I have a couple of brief questions. Can you explain why the funding levels were cut for basic education? What does the cut mean about the administration's prioritization of education? And is this a strategic decision by the administration to deprioritize education?
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to address this issue and feel and very much respect your singular and important leadership on this issue. Through the presentation of our 2012 budget, we have had to make very difficult and very challenging trade-offs that have included a 17% reduction in the proposal for the education budget. Most of those savings are identified in Pakistan and to a lesser extent in Afghanistan, where we believe we can manage a transition to a new strategy in both of those countries that has prioritized the productive economic growth sectors and will maintain a commitment to the education sector, but will seek greater investment and partnership with partners like DFID and other international donors for a more leveraged approach in the education sector. Our administration is strongly committed to education, and in particular girls' education. We believe that that is one of the most important vehicles for creating sustainable societies, stable societies, and productive economies over time. We know that a dollar invested in that space provides greater outcomes in terms of reductions in child mortality and improvement in long-term social outcomes than in almost any other. As a result, we've structured and presented a new education strategy that will allow us to reach 100 million students and improve their literacy and reading outcomes at grade level, particularly in primary grades. We've appreciated the input from yourself and your staff in constructing the strategy. We believe it will help us get a better handle on making sure every dollar we spend in education generates real learning outcomes. And we've noted that over the last decade, as there has been increased attendance in schools, there has also been a flattening and in some cases a reduction in quality and educational attainment outcomes, in part due to overcrowding and other issues related to teacher effectiveness. So we're very focused on getting better outcomes through the strategy. I would also want to comment that the current situation with respect to H.R. 1 creates a significant difficulty with respect to education. It goes well beyond the 17%, almost doubles the effective cut on the education programs. At that level, we would not be able to protect the non-Pakistan, non-Afghanistan girls' education programs, and we think as many as 10 million girls in particular might be vulnerable and therefore no longer receiving assistance through USAID girls' education programs. We're going through a very challenging process of trying to understand where we can rationalize, and we've presented in the 2012 budget a series of rationalizations that are difficult trade-offs to make. But I believe the setback represented for girls' education in that legislation and that budget will be very, very hard for us to overcome, because we'd be cutting back in a manner that wouldn't let us make the transition to the more outcomes-oriented strategy we're presenting.
Couple of quick follow-ups. What is the reasoning behind deciding not to prioritize secondary education? And there have been recent reports in Afghanistan that because of the extreme views by many of the people in charge in the villages, that girls' education is going backwards rather than forward. The yellow light's on, so maybe I'll just let you comment on those too.
On secondary, we will continue to prioritize secondary education, but we have found through recent research and through the development of our strategy that the evidence shows that one of the key barriers for kids and girls in particular continuing on through secondary education are quality and outcomes in terms of learning and attainment in primary education. So we believe getting kids better outcomes in terms of learning and reading in particular at grade level in primary attainment will lead to a big bump in secondary, in the number of kids that continue on through secondary education. The only reason we couldn't put more resources in secondary education were the tough trade-offs we tried to make with respect to FY12. In terms of Afghanistan and girls' education, I perhaps will come back to that when I have more time on Afghanistan, but we've tried to very much prioritize. As you know, that's been a 9-year effort to now get more than 7 million girls in school, and our team is working very hard to maintain the trend there in terms of both attendance, attainment, and safe spaces in schools for girls in all different contexts in that country.
I look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you.
Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Shah, welcome. I want to take just a moment to express my appreciation for the very significant progress you have made within your career within the State Department. You've moved very rapidly to positions of very important responsibility, and I want to congratulate you relative to that. In connection with international education efforts on the part of USAID and other government agencies, I must say that I can't help but wonder if we're not really kidding ourselves in connection with the role that America might actually play in connection with these efforts. Indeed, the American public is of the view that we spend an awful lot more of our money than 1% or 5% on foreign assistance. If you ask the average person out there, they'll say, surely about 25% of our national budget goes to foreign assistance. Those of us who care about this arena know that that absolutely is not the case, and that our role in the world needs to increase in intensity. But to presume in places like Pakistan or Afghanistan that we're going to penetrate those cultures at a level to dramatically change their education system could very well be a dream world or a kid's game. The fact is that we have done a horrible job just using domestic money to improve our own education system in this country. One need only spend a few moments looking at the nation's capital education system to know what a miserable failure we've been in connection with that. So, Dr. Shah, my real point is that delivering money to countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan and actually being assured that those dollars are going to flow in the direction that was intended in the first place is kind of fundamental if we really want to help those individual citizens and people in those countries. So I'd very much like to have you help us be more specific regarding the safeguards that are in place to ensure that the money flows go where we intend them to go. And indeed, I'd be interested in your priorities as to how do we improve and strengthen those guarantees.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. I particularly appreciate your highlighting that the American public does sometimes believe we spend 25% on foreign assistance when we spend less than 1%. And I'm encouraged by the fact that they also respond to that data when asked how much they think we should spend and say 10%, and believe it represents a reality that the American public are willing to make these investments if they believe they're getting real results. And that brings me to your question.
So if you will, if we could join in the public's concern and suggest we're going to try to push it below that 10%, we might very well create an atmosphere in which everybody thinks we're doing this job.
Sir, I'll leave the political strategy to the honorable members of the committee, and I will do my best to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of this work. With respect to girls' education, especially in Afghanistan and Pakistan, these are places where we have now been working for a number of years at real scale. In Afghanistan, we have more than 7 million kids in school as a result of U.S.-supported programs. We've helped, in a spirit of partnership with their ministry, develop standards and provide teacher training to improve the quality of education that takes place in those settings. And we get regular reports on both attendance, quality, and the Ministry of Education reforms that we've insisted upon, but that they have worked with us in a spirit of partnership to put in place, so we have standardized protocols for how we do the work. That is critical to maintaining stable Afghan societies, and to go back to General Petraeus, one of the things he has highlighted as necessary to maintain an effective environment and exit strategy for U.S. troops. In Pakistan, the current environment in Pakistan, with the devolution of authority to state governments and provincial governments, has required us to work more directly with them, and we're pursuing that actively. I want to speak to the point about domestic education, because what we do internationally is quite informed by the learnings and the observations of the education reform movement here in the United States. In fact, the new education strategy that we have proposed implements rigorous testing and outcomes testing, so we understand reading and literacy outcomes at grade level. It sets tougher standards for teacher training, and it puts accountability mechanisms in so families can identify whether teachers are showing up in schools as they say they're going to. All of those things came out of data that is shared between the international and domestic communities on the quality of education outcomes.
Mr. Jackson.
Madam Chair, may I ask, before my time begins, may I ask a parliamentary inquiry?
Yes.
Madam Chair, if I ask my questions up front, and I do have 3 questions regarding H.R. 1, is it possible to allow the administrator then the remaining balance of my time to answer the question without taking the time away from him?
You may.
In other words, that's fine? Okay, thank you.
We'll depend on Dr. Shaw to pay very close attention to that, however.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome back to the subcommittee, Dr. Shaw, and thank you for your testimony. H.R. 1 proposes a funding level of $430 million for the International Disaster Assistance Account, which is 50% below the President's fiscal year 11 request and 67% below fiscal year 10. For those of you who don't know, the IDA account provides assistance to those who've been internally displaced as a result of conflict or natural disasters like famines, floods, and earthquakes. The demands on this account have increased substantially in recent years as the number of people internally displaced by conflict and the number of natural disasters have risen. IDA funds are used to meet immediate needs that result from humanitarian crisis and assist people with critical recovery and transition needs when they're able to return home. My first question, as many as 50 million people are estimated to be displaced in any given year due to tsunamis, earthquakes, landslides, flooding, and natural disasters. Most of these are unforeseen emergencies that we cannot predict, like the earthquake in Haiti that killed an estimated 230,000 people in January of 2010, or the devastating effects of the earthquake and tsunami in Japan. I'm interested in knowing how will the cuts affect the IDA assistance account, impair our ability to respond to rapid on-site crisis. Secondly, with these cuts, will we have to prioritize which emergencies we respond to, meaning the trade-offs between ongoing and protracted emergencies like the DRC and unexpected ones like Japan? Will we be making those judgments in light of these cuts, Administrator Shaw? Where do you see these cuts having the deepest impact? And if we cannot respond to these emergencies, what will it mean in terms of lives lost? And my third question, the International Organization for Migration estimated that 810,000 Haitians are still living in tents and still need basic assistance while we work to find lasting solutions to the displacement of the devastating 2010 earthquake. With the cuts in H.R. 1, how will the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance be able to respond to the ongoing needs of the people of Haiti? I thank the Chairwoman for allowing me that latitude. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. I appreciate those questions, and you are absolutely right to point out that the 50% cut in the IDA account would be really the most dramatic stepping back away from our humanitarian responsibilities around the world in decades. We are seeing an increase in the number of disasters, and we're seeing an increase in the need for American leadership, often to bring in other donors to do the cost sharing and burden sharing required to successfully see through a disaster response and a transition. Currently, there are 1.6 million people in Darfur that depend on food, water, other commodities that are provided by USAID through this account. That would have to be reduced approximately proportionally, so it puts 800,000 people at risk. The long-term, the medium-term support programs for refugees and IDPs would be the ones that would perhaps take the most immediate consequence. The other consequence would be we simply would not be able to respond to disasters like the one we saw in Japan, where our ability to be first and fastest with not just getting the traditional disaster assistance response team that USAID has in, but with coordinating and sending in 6 National Regulatory Commission, Nuclear Regulatory Commission experts. We had those guys in right away, and that made a big difference in terms of the arc of the overall partnership, and I give a lot of credit to their work. But that is an interagency, whole-of-government response capability for which we have responsibility, and this 50% reduction would essentially invalidate our ability to conduct those kinds of operations. In Haiti, specifically, the numbers have varied between 650,000 and 810,000 in terms of the number of people still requiring disaster assistance response because they're in temporary or immediate shelter and camps, and we would have to scale back our support for that community as well. So overall, this would lead to a significant amount of reduction in feeding programs, medical programs, and food and water programs for people who are incredibly vulnerable and in a political environment where they're in real conflict or have nowhere else to turn. And the United States has always been, in a bipartisan basis for 7 decades, the leader in bringing the world together to do this work. We are getting more efficient at how we do the work. We are getting more data-oriented, and we're doing a much better job of getting cost sharing in. Even in this case, we put in place systems that enabled the American people to directly give almost $150 million to the Japanese as part of that response, which was much more than what we actually invested. But our ability to be first and to be in the lead for coordinating those efforts would be significantly reduced. And, you know, quite frankly, in places like Darfur, you would see a real humanitarian tragedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. Mr. Diaz-Balart.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Dr. Shaw, good to see you, sir. Let me come a little bit closer to our hemisphere. You know, there's only 4 states that are on the Department of State list of states that sponsor terrorism. One of them happens to be in our hemisphere, and it's the totalitarian dictatorship in Cuba. We've heard some discussion that the administration is considering a new direction for at least some aspects of the Cuba program. However, U.S. law and Section 109 of the Cuban Liberty and Democratic Solidarity, known as the Libertad Act, of 1996, or the Helms-Burton Act, it precisely enumerates what types and for what purposes the assistance is permitted in regard to Cuba. I'm going to read parts of that, of Section 109. It says, President is authorized to furnish assistance and provide other support for individuals and independent non-governmental organizations to support democracy-building efforts for Cuba, including the following. 1, published and informational matter, such as books, videos, etc., on transition to democracy, human rights, market economies, to be made available to independent democratic groups in Cuba. 2, humanitarian assistance to victims of political repression and their families, i.e. the families of political prisoners. Support for democratic and human rights groups in Cuba. And 4, support for visits and permanent deployment of independent international human rights monitors in Cuba. This authorization does not permit the administration to subsidize purely cultural type exchanges, so-called economic reforms or other activities that are not directly related to promoting democracy or human rights in Cuba. That's the law. Clearly, that's the law. Furthermore, Section 109C mandates that the President, quote, the President shall take all necessary steps to ensure that no funds or other assistance is provided to the Cuban government. Specifically, really a few questions, if I may, Dr. Shaw. What are your top priorities for the Cuba program in the upcoming year? Number 1. What changes, if any, do you plan to make to the programs as compared to previous years, specifically? Number 3 is, do you plan to continue to build on USAID's partnership with NGOs that have a proven track record of success in Cuba, which, you know, is a closed society, unlike, frankly, many in the world? So if you can answer those specific questions, and if I have time, I'll get into some other questions that you and I have already talked about. But I'd like some specific answers on those.
Because what we did with Mr. Jackson, let's set the timer again, and you've got 5 minutes to answer.
Thank you. I appreciate the questions. We are, in terms of our priorities, they are absolutely consistent with Section 109 of the law. They are defined as democracy, human rights, civil society investments, and investments to support humanitarian needs related to dissidents and their families, which I think is incredibly consistent with that legislation. We are putting forward a request for $20 million, as you're aware, and we will be executing the programs in a manner that is competitively bid and requires and seeks partners who are most capable of carrying out the work in an effective way, given the context of a closed and authoritarian society. So I hope that addresses our priorities. In terms of the changes we're making, I think this will be seen as an evolution from prior years in a direction that is more focused around the areas I identified. And in terms of partners, I think this will be an effective way to have a competitive process to identify partners who are both capable of implementation effectively in environments that are challenging implementation environments.
If I may, Dr. Shaw, so you're, again, because the law doesn't permit it, but so you're not looking at changing it for, you know, cultural programs, for that kind of thing, and that's correct? Okay. Now, when you're looking at those that have a track record, and are you focusing on those that have a track record in Cuba? Because, you know, we've had instances where people have you know, may be very effective in dealing with humanitarian cases around the world, but not with totalitarian regimes like Cuba. So you're looking at those who have emphasized those who have a track record in Cuba, with Cuba, dealing with stuff in Cuba.
We'll be using a number of criteria to identify partners who are capable of implementation in Cuba. One of the criteria will be their experience in working in those types of environments. Of course, working in Cuba counts as in being in that type of environment, and also their organizational and management accountabilities, as is our standard process, and given our new increased focus on accountabilities and effective financial management.
Dr. Shaw, you and I got together, and it was almost, we were almost, I guess both of us agreed that if it wasn't such a serious issue, we'd kind of think it's funny, which is the fact that the CN is still out there. And since January, my office has been told that it's in a couple of weeks it's coming, and then another couple of weeks, and another couple of weeks. You know, I met with State, and I was told in another couple of weeks, and you and I got together, and we both said that hopefully by the time we were at this hearing, we weren't going to be having to talk about when the CN is going to be coming up. As we discussed, you know, basically before last year, only $15 million of the $20 million that was budgeted for Cuba was able to be used for Cuba. It was sent to other countries because, frankly, the delays. And now we're heading in the same direction, unfortunately. So when is the CN going to finally be done? And number one is, and how will you keep the program on track? Because we're already delayed. So that the $20 million that was budgeted by Congress for Cuba will actually be used for the intended purposes. So it's a two-part question, because we're already delayed. Mm-hmm. When is the CN going to be out? And then how are you going to make sure that the money that is there goes to the intended purpose?
On the first part of the question, we're working with our interagency partners to get the CN to you as soon as possible. I had hoped it would be up by the end of the month, and I still continue to be focused on that. On the second part of the question, we have planning and programmatic plans underway to ensure we're able to execute the program, and our team that has worked to help construct the CN and design this approach will be capable of implementing this program in the time frame we have.
You're not going to give me a time certain for the CN, though.
I would like to, sir, but I worry that events may render that ineffective. So it is my goal to get that to you as soon as possible. I think it is consistent with 109. It is consistent with the direction in which we had our discussion, and it will be implemented in a manner that prioritizes effectiveness and accountability in a difficult implementation environment.
And I appreciate that, and again, I don't want to, but obviously you understand that doesn't give a lot of comfort in the whole process when we're continuously, and and again, you've been great, but when we continue to be told, basically, yeah, it's coming, and it gets to the point where the credibility of the administration it has to be put in question. So I think, I would urge you to, I know you are, but to please focus on that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Shaw, please follow up with staff as soon as the notification is transmitted so that members' questions can be answered. And I'm going to go to Mr. Rothman next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Shaw, it's always a pleasure to be with you. I consider you one of the rock stars of our government. You just bring so many qualifications, dedication, and effectiveness to every job you undertake, and thank you for your service, and I look forward to a continued brilliant career. But just keep it at this level, and we'll be very happy. I have a feeling there's more and better things in store for you. But in your present role, I wanted you to comment, please, on the recent protests across North Africa and the Middle East, and which demonstrate that when the political compact between citizens and government falls apart, we have great disruption, and outside actors who are not friends of the United States or even friends of the people of those various countries can intervene. Intervene because the protesters are not as well organized or don't have the skills or tools to effectuate their desire for greater democracy and freedom in their respective countries. Is the USAID involved at all in assisting those who are seeking greater democracy in, specifically, Libya, Egypt, Tunisia, Bahrain, Yemen, or elsewhere in that region right now?
Yes, absolutely. I thank you for your comments. The President and the Secretary of State have been very clear about the administration's position in supporting a responsible transition and understanding that this is a unique and historic moment when peoples in these countries are recognizing and demanding their democratic and human rights. USAID, consistent with that strategic direction, is working in most of the countries you identified to assess our programs and to ensure that they are aligned with that specific objective. In Libya, our role is primarily at this point humanitarian in support of an ongoing international effort. In Egypt, we have prioritized and sent a notification up for a $150 million reprogramming of resources that will be used to support an effective democratic transition process. And in Tunisia, we have supported efforts with specific programs such as the Office of Transition Initiatives that have provided insights and assessments and programmatic plans as part of a coordinated diplomacy and development effort in a number of these places.
I think many Americans are not. I think that many Americans are not aware, specifically that USAID is undertaking these responsibilities. They just assume someone in our government is working on these projects. So it's nice for my fellow countrymen and women to put a face and an agency to the work that's being done. I want to, in the time I have left, ask you another question. It has to do with the reduction in personnel at USAID, which resulted, this is before, I believe before your time, in increased amount of contracting to private contractors to oversee a number of the projects. And as traditionally happens, that is a recipe often for accountability and transparency and effectiveness problems. I understand that last year you prioritized reversing the contracting trend and introduced an ambitious reform agenda known as USAID Forward. From your perspective, how will these reforms lead to greater efficiencies And does your budget request sustain this process to ensure a better return on U.S. development efforts?
Thank you. I perhaps will use the opportunity to introduce a graph that simply delineates the 57% reduction in staffing at USAID over a many decade period. And at the same time when, especially in recent years, programmatic responsibilities have increased, especially in difficult to operate environments like Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Sudan, and Haiti. In that context, we believe efforts to improve our accountability and squeeze more results out of taxpayer investments required a fundamental reform of our basic operating model. And so we introduced USAID Forward to reform our human resources and to prioritize procurement reforms that allow us to rein in contract partners and better manage to results and outcomes. The FY12 request has two specific requests built in to support that. First, a request to hire 95 mid-career technical officers as part of a restructured development leadership initiative. Those mid-career technical officers are uniquely required to oversee and engage in contract and program oversight, and I can show how their allocation to our top initiatives and our most important hotspot countries will allow us to save significant taxpayer dollars over time. Second, we've requested 70 Office of Acquisition and Assistance procurement and contract specialists that they will, with specialized skills, allow us to reintroduce certain practices that I consider pretty basic in terms of saving taxpayer dollars, such as shifting from cost reimbursement contracting to fixed price contracting. And that may sound detailed or nuanced, but especially in active war zones, we've seen cost escalations in reimbursement contracts that I think are inefficient for American taxpayers. And I think if we can invest more upfront in designing a greater percentage of our contracts as fixed price contracts, then we know what we're getting. We have a fixed price, and contractors are responsible for cost overruns, not American taxpayers. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Hello, Dr. Shaw. Just a couple of quick issues. You know, we're going to have a difficult budget year and a lot of tight budget allocations all over the place. And this subcommittee is looking to highlight areas of duplication within the government agencies, as well as identify programs where funding is inconsistent or not coordinated with other assistance programs. This year, the MCC expects to enter into second compacts with countries, I believe Georgia and Ghana in particular, as a means of graduating them from U.S. development assistance. Yet the 22 MCC compact countries, I understand, also had USAID development and economic assistance levels that totaled $1.2 billion for fiscal year 2010. So, Dr. Shaw, I guess, and by the way, I've been to Georgia. I was very impressed with what I saw going on there, and strong leadership, and very, very pleased. But given the fiscal constraints that this Congress and this committee are now facing, is this an area where USAID and the committee could find potential savings? And what steps is the administration willing to take to wean second compact countries off other U.S. development and economic assistance programs?
Thank you. I respect the point that this is a difficult budget environment, and I also respect the need to find efficiencies across our entire development portfolio. I would recast the challenge to us as requiring us to look across USAID, MCC, OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and PEPFAR, and any number of other development programs. Even within USAID, we have multiple different tools that we apply, such as the Development Credit Authority, which stimulates local private investment, or our Global Development Alliance that brings in private sector investments. When we look across that portfolio, we have been aggressive about finding areas of duplication, eliminating them, and finding efficiencies. Our second compact partnerships with MCC in Tanzania and Ghana are good examples of where, through an initiative we call the Partnership for Growth, which does not require additional cost resources, but it allows for much deeper integration, we are able to make sure that second compacts are designed in a manner that is consistent with, complementary with, and efficient given the existing portfolios, and make adjustments to the existing portfolios to integrate better and save us resources while getting better results. In terms of the fiscal constraints you identify, I think we've made a real effort to identify more than $400 million of cost reallocations in the FY12 budget. What I worry about is that with the HR1 budget, if that becomes a baseline reality for fiscal year 12, that would be very problematic for some of our most important programs. For example, in health in particular, we have tried to build on President Bush's legacy with the PEPFAR program by introducing similar investments in very cost-efficient areas like malaria control, child survival, and saving women's lives at birth. We estimate, and I believe these are very conservative estimates, that HR1 would lead to 70,000 kids dying. Of that 70,000, 30,000 would come from malaria control programs that would have to be scaled back specifically. The other 40,000 is broken out as 24,000 would die because of a lack of support for immunizations and other investments, and 16,000 would be because of a lack of skilled attendants at birth. And I believe there are ways to find the efficiencies we're all seeking through being more businesslike in how we do our work, reining in contract partners, and doing better program oversight. There's a way to do this that does not have to cost lives, and we're very focused and very much want to work with the committee to identify a path forward that can allow us to be effective at doing so.
And can I just quickly change subjects? I saw on page 3 of your testimony you mentioned that you're working with farmers in the Arghandab Valley down in Afghanistan. I visited there in September in the little village of Kakhrez. I wouldn't expect you to know where that is. It's a very dangerous place, as you're probably aware. How's it going down there right now? I was a little concerned when I was there back in early September.
The security situation there is much improved. I am familiar with that village and have visited those programs in Arghandab. I will point out, because it's a great example of where a Stryker brigade had suffered real casualties there, and that's American lives. And we were able to, with a program we call a VIPA, a voucher and agriculture program that supports local agriculture, help create greater stability in that community by helping them return to their roots, which in that case is local agricultural production, and even tying some of that production to procurements that are now done by the Department of Defense that buy some of the higher value outputs, and setting the stage for them to be more effectively exporting fruits and pomegranates and other products outside of the country, and really rebuilding Afghanistan's proud high-value agriculture history. That's a priority program for us, and we continue to see real progress in the agriculture sector in Afghanistan.
You've not taken on any casualties now? Have you taken any casualties as State Department?
Our implementing partners who hire local Afghan staff have suffered casualties in that area, and I appreciate your asking the question because it highlights that the civilian partners are taking great risks to rebuild their own country. Thank you.
Thank you.
You recommended 2 food security programs in Guatemala for us to visit. The first is a program that distributed emergency food assistance from the PL 480 program to children who were malnourished. And it was very interesting to see. In contrast, the second site was a program aimed at preventing emergency food needs by generating increased agricultural productivity that not only fed the community but generated some income. I support the approach you're pursuing in food security, but I question the funding levels requested. At $1.4 billion, this is more than triple the 08 level, and as of December 10th, USAID had a funding pipeline of over $800 million in agriculture and food security programs, some of which was appropriated in FY07. So can you tell me what your justification is for the level of funding for FY12 when the program has grown very rapidly? There are significant funding pipelines, and additional planning work needs to be conducted in several of the countries.
Thank you. I appreciate the question, and will point out that our Feed the Future program is really our signature effort to demonstrate how we are trying to make some tough decisions and do things very differently. Guatemala is a good example of both how the PL 480 program has is in the process of restructuring its feeding to target kids in the -9 to 24-month age category. Of course, -9 is pregnant women in the first 2 years of life for young kids, because we know that if we provide targeted, high-value foods during that period of time, it has lasting and significant benefits for child brain development, economic potential, and social stability in a way that does not exist if it's done for older kids. So as difficult as it is to shift feeding from kids who need it and who are hungry, we're making tough decisions to invest where we think we get the most results. Similarly, in Guatemala, and I appreciate you had the chance to visit the Walmart partnership, we've now expanded that throughout the region, and it's a great example of how USAID, working with USDA on the phytosanitary side, are making targeted investments to help large communities of farmers produce high-value products, sell them into global value chains, earn more incomes. And now, when I visited the village, I'm not sure exactly where you were, I visited a village where they told me that 3 years ago there were 20 kids in school. And now today, because of that partnership with USAID and Walmart, they had a demand for 500 kids to go to school. And that's because when women farmers earn income, the very first thing they do is invest that income in the health and education of their children. And it just demonstrates how we can move communities to a place of out of poverty and a place of stability in a way that's far more efficient than dealing with consequences. In terms of the budget, with respect to this, of the $1.4 billion, I believe approximately $300 million is for the World Bank Trust Fund. We've worked aggressively to set that fund up and to make sure that they have right now, they're not able to make grants to countries that we have worked with to submit proposals. Countries have worked very hard to show they'll increase their investments, do the right things on the policy side, invite in real private investment, and make tough reforms. And they are only able to send the proposals in if the fund is funded and able to give money. So that's number one. On the bilateral program, which is $1.1 billion, we have, and I did, stop the original program so that there could be a period of developing new strategies and restructuring projects. I would highlight what we did in Senegal, where we essentially shut down programs that were helping very poor communities do good things in terms of produce honey and sell honey and thereby serve as providing livelihood support for very, very poor people. But through a rigorous analysis, we found we would help more people with the same resources if we shifted those resources into larger value chains in maize, rice, and dairy. And so we've restructured the program, worked with the government, brought in other donors, and brought in partners like the World Bank. And now our team is ready to accelerate significantly their program implementation. We're seeing that in Ghana, Tanzania, Bangladesh, Guatemala, Senegal, Ethiopia, Malawi. And without the $1.1 billion, we will simply not be able to live up to the commitments we've made to entice all of these other partners to be participants. I'd finally conclude by just noting I had a conversation most recently with the President who plans to use the upcoming G20 to once more ask our international partners to live up to their commitments. We committed $3.5 billion to this Feed the Future initiative, and the international community committed an additional $18 billion, bringing the total to almost $22 billion. And in order to have the credibility to hold our partners to account, we need to meet our own commitments. So I thank you for highlighting it and for our support, and I can assure you this is one area where every dollar we spend will be spent incredibly efficiently and will generate really the kinds of results that will inspire people to know that we can end hunger over time and do it in a way that helps American businesses and helps alleviate the national security pressure of countries that otherwise suffer from failed states and food riots.
I'm going to extend my own time a little bit, and I'll allow everybody else to do that that's left here, because one of the countries that you didn't mention was Haiti. And in the Feed the Future program, one of the most important thing about that in the country selection is the criteria, which is host government commitment, leadership, governance, and political will. And Haiti is one of the largest program budgets requested for FY12. And there's no doubt there's need, but I understand that Haiti doesn't have a country implementation plan in place. Yet it's slated for one of the largest programs, with Haiti in a state of transition recovery from last year's earthquake, How can you tell the subcommittee, what can you tell us about why funding there is a priority?
Well, two or three things. First, Haiti has made a significant commitment and has moved faster than any other country to go from zero to planned development in a context where their agriculture ministry had collapsed and they had lost much of their people in that ministry. And the effort they've made is so extraordinary in that regard. Second, we have had a long-standing process of getting the Haitian government to make some policy reforms and changes to allow for more effectiveness, and we're seeing the results of that. We facilitated a partnership with Monsanto that brought improved hybrid seeds, and we saw through one of our programs called the Winner Project an almost 200% improvement in agricultural production outcomes in key plains production areas in Haiti. Third, Haiti is an area is a partner where we have a large PL 480 program, and we are doing, I think, a very good job of integrating that in to make sure that we're not depressing Haitian prices and creating the right incentives for Haitian farmers to produce. And fourth, as part of their overall strategy in Haiti, having strong, vibrant rural communities that can provide employment and income and keep people out of Port-au-Prince is a core part of their decentralization strategy. That's why we're supporting the industrial park in the north. It's why we're supporting the agriculture sector, because that's still where 60–70% of Haitians make their formal employment and earn their incomes and their food. And so we've been working aggressively to make sure this is a Feed the Future partnership that includes private sector partners like the Coca-Cola Company and others, brings logistics and improved seed varieties and technology to bear, and they will be held to the same standards of accountability as all the other Feed the Future programs.
Thank you. Mrs. Lowy.
Thank you. That was a great segue. I'd like to pursue further what we're doing in Haiti, because the feedback I'm getting is that it's moving much too slowly. I want to pursue with you the joint venture in Haiti that was announced between that you referenced, the Haitian government, the U.S., the Inter-American Development Bank, to develop an industrial park near the North Coast. This is perfect to keep people away from Port-au-Prince. And we know that the South Korean textile manufacturer will be the main tenant, promised to create 20,000 jobs. Now, it has the possibility, the potential to create thousands more jobs on top of those at the textile plant. And there are efforts, we're hearing talk of building homes, roads, schools, other communities' necessity to allow workers and their families to live near the park and not be forced to return to Port-au-Prince. I'd really like to hear more about that. And this is a perfect opportunity to put in place what, as you know what I'm talking about, a community of learning. You don't have the outside forces like terrorism, thank goodness, to derail development plans. Without an education system already in place, we have the opportunity to see exactly how this model for schools and community development can work. So I'd really like to hear what you're doing. What is the U.S.'s role in this new development? Who's responsible for guiding the development? I envision this economic development project with a school, with a health center, with literacy programs, food programs. Where are we? How long is it going to take before everyone moves back to Port-au-Prince?
Thank you for the question. I think our intention is that with this program, people wouldn't move back to Port-au-Prince because they'd have economic opportunities and community services co-located in and around this industrial park. As you point out, the target employment is 20,000. That we are supporting housing efforts in that area, and I think in a very innovative way.
Is it happening?
It is happening. The housing part of our support is to help clear the area, provide foundational support, and we're partnering with the Red Cross and others who might actually construct the homes, but it's a cost-sharing arrangement designed to leverage our dollars. I can come back with the specific time frame in terms of how many houses when.
And what about for schools?
Over 18 months, I would expect much of this to be underway, and the first phase is certainly completed. In terms of community services, we would have schools, water and sanitation programs. They are part of the planning and part of the effort. The partnership with IDB writ large includes a $10 million transfer to IDB to prioritize education. And so we're working in an education partnership with them more broadly, but that includes at this site and in this specific area. And a lot of that will be around teacher training, setting standards, so there are common educational attainment testing and standards processes countrywide. So I believe this, we're hoping this will be a model priority. It is a high priority for us, a high priority for the IHRC Commission, and a high priority for the Haitian government, and we believe it needs to succeed. In terms of the overall path of progress that you alluded to, I just want to point out that we've seen over the last few months a significant acceleration of activity. At the one-year anniversary on January 12th, we had just over 1 million people continuing in temporary shelters. We think that number is now down to just over 600,000. And as we're now working much more aggressively on rubble removal, housing construction, and getting people out of those living situations, we're seeing a significant acceleration of activity. We think 20% of our obligations for this year will be made by June, and we expect 50% to be made by September. And we believe we're on path to spend the supplemental resources across the 3-year time frame that was the original proposal in the documentation with respect to the supplemental. So we're very focused on the financial management aspect of this. We are, as I pointed out previously, trying to do this the right way and making the judgment that investing in planning, bringing the partners together, and in many cases investing in local construction firms and training them to be the providers of services in terms of much of the reconstruction is the right way to approach this, so we leave real lasting institutions in Haiti. But we will track on and continue to report to this committee on our financial progress as well with respect to spending for results.
I'd like to follow up with you, Dr. Shah, in seeing a specific plant. This is very exciting to have this South Korean manufacturer there and to see the plans for the schools, the plans for the health center. I know Dr. Farmer is very actively building an institute, but not near where the South Korean plan is proposed. So I think this is an opportunity that we can replicate in other places. We talk a lot about it, but in my visits to many places, I always see marvelous examples of excellence. But kids are still walking 2 hours to go to school. You get to the school, there's one teacher for 100 kids. You just don't see it all put together. And in an area like this, with all the problems in the world and terrorism impeding so many actions, I'd be most appreciative. Are we going to go back again? Should I ask another question, or how do you want to do this?
We're going to go to Mr. Diaz-Balart,
Okay.
and then if you have another question,
Thank you,
certainly
Dr.
will.
Shah. So if we can continue that discussion, I'd be most appreciative.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Dr. Shaw, last summer, Congress passed the Supplemental Appropriations Act. It contained $2.8 billion for Haiti's recovery after the horrendous earthquake in January of 2010. Now, while some minor requests for proposals dealing with Haiti have just been released by USAID, my understanding is to date the major RFA dealing with Haiti's healthcare rehabilitation has not been issued yet. So, I don't have to tell you about the issues that Haiti has with with their healthcare issues. So, given the urgent need for help, when will the RFA for healthcare rehabilitation be released?
I will come back with a specific answer on that. I don't believe it will be one RFA. It is a series of projects and programs, and our goal is frankly not to have one single project that's so large that it by definition narrows the number of partners that could participate and the local institutions that could participate. I will say with respect to the health effort in Haiti, it is an example of our global health initiative where we're working hand in hand with the Centers for Disease Control and the PEPFAR AIDS program. The plan includes nearly 30 to 40% investment in building a structured health system so that you have connectivity between hospitals and clinics, and you have medical personnel at each stage, including community health workers that can get out into communities. The second thing I would say is we have currently been addressing a rapid and aggressive cholera outbreak, as you know, and I think our team's integrated response has been quite effective. The case fatality rates at cholera treatment centers has come down more than fourfold over the last 3 months. We believe we're looking at while cholera will be a problem in Haiti for some time, we believe we have a strategy that integrates the health outreach with the water, sanitation, and hygiene that can manage that. And we continue to see Port-au-Prince and the communities that were provided support through the humanitarian relief effort continue to be relatively protected because their access to clean water and safe sanitation is actually higher today than it was pre-earthquake. And those are all important components of the health sector strategy going forward.
And look, we all know that, you know, Haiti has a lot of issues. They had a lot of issues before the earthquake, and obviously now they have some incredible health issues that they're dealing with. I kind of go back to, because, you know, here's an issue that's urgent, obviously, and yet a lot of, whether it's, you know, a number of RFAs or whatever it may be, there seems to be, how do I say this in a nice way? There doesn't seem to be the urgency that is required, because again, this is an issue of life and death. And so I just, adding to what I said previously about the issue with the Cuban democracy issue, there seems to be a bit of a pattern, I hate to say this, where there are delays after delays after delays. And so the issue is that it doesn't give me a lot of confidence in the case of the health care rehabilitation issue in Haiti that there's the realization of the urgency, and then we already talked about the other issues. So it's a little bit, frankly, worrisome.
Well, I'd like to address that directly. I believe I would characterize it very differently. Our Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, which has been managing the health sector response, especially to emergency needs, has from the beginning been aggressive about moving resources and getting support services out quickly. Our response to the cholera epidemic was so rapid and so broadly based in its ability to reach rural communities that really no one had reached for a long time. We used text messages to get information out to communities that otherwise couldn't get it. We set up 160 cholera treatment points of service, including mobile points of service, very, very rapidly. We did all of that through issuing RFAs and working with partners incredibly rapidly, within days and weeks. In terms of the going forward health system reconstruction, we continue to be on that path. The components of this that require emergency response are moving very quickly. The components that require more integrated planning, we're doing that planning, and we'll issue a broader series of RFAs so that many different partners can participate. And that's worth doing. In Haiti, over a long time in the health sector, we've treated everything as an emergency, and as a result, you've had a lot of NGOs doing work that don't necessarily communicate with each other and don't have a system that they can plug into for a cohesive and strategic approach. With respect to our democracy and governance programming, I would just highlight, and I know you weren't referring to Egypt, but in Egypt, we have moved from reprogramming $150 million to getting the congressional notification up to now completing the first round of RFAs to provide support to institutions within a matter of weeks. And I know that, there was some challenge about whether we could do that, but we've moved very, very quickly. And I think that, for us, is becoming a model of how we want to work, especially in areas that require speed and focus with respect to these critical, time-sensitive transitions.
Thank you, Dr. Shaw. Mr. Schiff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for being here, Administrator. I appreciate the superb work that you do. And I apologize, this has probably been asked earlier. If it has, you can certainly abbreviate your answer, and I'll get the full text of your remarks later. But I wanted to raise again the topic of the dramatic changes going on in the Middle East and North Africa. This is a generational opportunity for tens of millions of people to enjoy a better form of governance and an opportunity for a better future. And I think we need to seize this opportunity to assist them in every way. I was pleased to see Secretary Clinton's announcement of $150 million to support that effort in Egypt, and a reprogramming of $20 million for Tunisia. Are part of these funds coming from USAID? Does USAID have the flexibility to do reprogramming necessary to meet the needs in those countries? And beyond those countries, how will the dynamics of what's going on in the region affect USAID's approach to democratic and governance assistance in other countries that may not be in the throes of revolution, but are candidates for it unless they move more swiftly along the pace of reform?
Well, thank you. I think we fully recognize and appreciate that this is a unique generational opportunity. The President and the Secretary have been very specific and clear in terms of their directions to USAID to be supportive of that critical, time-bound, and time-sensitive opportunity. Our approach is very country by country because each of our countries have a different modality of programming. In some places like Egypt, we've had a very long-standing program with a lot of visibility and partnership with the government of Egypt. As a result, reprogramming $150 million, and that was USAID-led reprogramming of USAID resources, requires consultation and negotiation with our partners and with the government. We have focused on deploying those resources rapidly for the purpose of supporting the current transition opportunity. And so that means providing support for an effective elections process, support for civil society organizations defined very broadly, including many new institutions and organizations that have just been formed and created. It allows us to support organizations like IRI, NDI, IFIS, and others that are able to provide unique capabilities to partners in that environment and do that in a spirit of partnership with those on the ground. So I believe we are focused on moving quickly and rapidly. For us, it's very important to do this in a manner that is deeply connected to the diplomatic realities and to the country-by-country unique characteristics that define both what's possible and what is responsible in terms of supporting a transition, and we're trying to do that in a very integrated way with the State Department.
Looking at some of the unique characteristics in Egypt and the accelerated time frame for Egyptian elections in September, parliamentary elections, presidential elections to follow sometime thereafter, how is USAID keeping pace with that? Obviously, there are tremendous organizational challenges for political parties that have been marginalized in Egypt. So can you talk a little bit about how we can meet that aggressive timetable?
Yes, you know, we're fortunate to have more than 200 people, most of whom are Foreign Service nationals, in our Cairo office. We've been working and have a long history there and have good relationships with a broad range of partners, both registered and unregistered. We work in partnership with MEPI and other State Department programs based out of the embassy so that we have a coordinated approach. And we build on, and we are pursuing our work in a way that's very sensitive to the time scale here and the time sensitivity of needing to act quickly, which is why we've put the $150 million notification was up here quickly. We've effectively reprogrammed resources to do that, and we'll continue to work at that pace in order to meet the President and the Secretary's overall objectives here in terms of supporting a transition to self-determination and democracy.
Well, thank you again for your superb work, Mr. Administrator, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you again. At the London conference in 2010, the United States and the international community agreed to work to provide up to 50% of donor assistance directly through mechanisms of the government of Afghanistan. This past February, when I attended the Munich Security Conference and had an opportunity to hear President Karzai further suggest that all funding should be channeled through Afghan government mechanisms. Either way, sending funding to the Afghanistan government carries a significant risk of corruption, collusion, and misappropriation of assistance funds. But on the other hand, if we're to successfully transition out of Afghanistan by 2014, we have to find a way to address this corruption. I'm aware that we are working closely in an interagency way, especially with Treasury, to monitor those funds and to assist the Afghans to address the issue of corruption. I'm also aware that the government of Germany is working cooperatively with us. So if you can explain to us, what is USAID doing to increase the capacity of Afghan ministries that are being considered for direct government-to-government support, and what process is USAID undertaking to assess the capacity of the Afghan ministers to receive direct assistance? And another question, I might as well put them all out there. By moving away from large contractors, will more programs be implemented by local NGOs? And are you working with local NGOs to assist them in developing satisfactory oversight practices? So let me give you the opportunity to talk about what we're doing to transition the money through the government ministries. What are we doing to provide adequate oversight for the NGOs and other training programs? And do we keep tabs and work cooperatively with the defense programs, so or are they just continuing to hand out cash? Maybe we'll have to ask them directly as they move around trying to transition their programs as well to the Afghan. Maybe I should have you just address the first program. Our chair is a member of the Defense Committee, so she can deal with the cash that's being handed out through the Defense Department. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you. Maybe I'll address 2 or 3 different points. The first point on Afghan ministries and our support for them. We have pursued that in 2 tracks. One track has been providing them with a greater sense of partnership, shared program design, and in some cases, like our AVIPA program that provides agricultural support to farmers in unstable environments, the ability to put the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock logo on vouchers that go to farmers, so it builds the credibility and support for the government. In that context, we don't directly fund through the government, but we have a shared partnership on program design, on understanding the criteria we're using to implement the programs, and on evaluating and reassessing how that fits into the overall transition plan for 2015. The second category is where we do intend to provide direct resources. And in that context, we've done it in 2 primary mechanisms. The biggest mechanism has been the Afghan Reconstruction Trust Fund, which is an international validated mechanism that provides all of the controls of any other mechanism we have. That continues to be our main vehicle for reaching the 50% target, and we will continue to hold that mechanism to account with our international partners, including Germany and some others, and linking that to the IMF program. The second part of direct support is directly investing through different line ministries. We've worked with agriculture, with education, with health, and a number of others. And in cases where we do that, we embed procurement teams and accountability teams in the ministry. Health is a good example where we have, over a 6-year period, really helped the Ministry of Public Health develop their own project implementation mechanisms, but we've done it by being embedded with them so that we can track resources and have the right accountability mechanisms. I would argue that that's worth doing, and that extra effort is what will present for us an exit strategy, so that we don't just have U.S. implementers out there running health clinics and schools and agriculture programs outside of a coordinated effort with all levels of Afghan governance. The other part of your question spoke to how we provide risk assessments and capacity support for partners we want to invest in. As part of our procurement reform, we have developed around the world 2 types of teams: risk assessment teams, and they've developed a risk assessment tool that was just recently validated in multiple pilot countries to allow all of our practitioners in the field to have tools to do the kind of assessments of local institutions prior to making awards to those institutions. And then second, we've implemented a series of new local capacity building programs for NGOs and for government institutions. And the combination of those new tools really helps make our procurement reform real and operational for members of our teams around the world. And I would welcome the opportunity to send to the committee details on both of those mechanisms, but they're very important in terms of reintroducing a skill set at USAID that I think is core to the discipline of development, and that is how you spend money in a way that builds capacity, generates results, and gives us the conditions that would allow for our exit over time.
Let me just close and thank you very much again for your leadership. Given the budget crunch and given the bipartisan focus on making every dollar count, I think this kind of information is absolutely essential for those of us who believe in the important work that you and your agency are doing. So I truly want to thank you, and I look forward to getting up-to-date reports in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shaw, for your time, for your excellent answers and the work that you're doing in difficult times. And as we talk about what to fund and what not to fund, it is the time that we're dealing with. And so one of the questions I'll submit, and I would greatly appreciate your rapid response, has to do with your top priorities. And I say I won't take your time here, but give you some time to think about it. This concludes today's hearing. The record will remain open for members to submit questions. For the record, the hearing is adjourned.